Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Friday, July 5th, 2024. President Joe Biden campaigns for re-election in Madison, Wisconsin, just over a week after an acknowledged poor debate performance against former President Donald Trump that has now led to a third U.S. House Democrat, Seth Moulton of Massachusetts, to call on the president to drop out of the race. President Biden saying today, "I am running and I'm going to win again." U.S. economy adds 206,000 jobs in June, and the unemployment rate goes up from 4% to 4.1%. Texas Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick talks about preparations for Hurricane Beryl, expected to hit Texas in the next couple of days. The new British Prime Minister, Labour Party leader Keir Starmer, takes office after yesterday's election that saw a historic defeat of the Conservative Party and its leader, now former Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. And the NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg is asked about the president of NATO member Hungary, Viktor Orban, meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin in Moscow. NATO holds its 75th anniversary summit in Washington next week, and Secretary General Stoltenberg said Russia's war against Ukraine will be the most urgent issue addressed. President Joe Biden campaigned today in Madison, Wisconsin, a battleground state. CBS News writes it marks the start of a crucial weekend for his re-election bid as he seeks to assuage concerns about his fitness for a second term, sparked by his startling debate performance just over 1 week ago. In addition to the campaign event in Madison, on Friday afternoon, Mr. Biden will tape an interview with ABC's George Stephanopoulos, which the network said will air in full Friday night. The president will also head to Philadelphia for another campaign event on Sunday, capping the July 4th holiday weekend with a visit to a second battleground state. In a pair of radio interviews that aired Thursday, Mr. Biden admitted he had a bad debate and that he screwed up. He told the Earl Ingram Show, which airs in Wisconsin, "I learned from my father, when you get knocked down, just get back up. Get back up. And you know we're going to win this election. We're going to just beat Donald Trump." That was from CBS News. One of the introductory speakers at today's rally in Madison, Wisconsin was Congressman Mark Pocan, a Democrat who supports President Biden's re-election.
Just in the last week, some say the snow globe of the election has been shaken. But you know what hasn't been shaken? The resolve of the people. The resolve to have leaders that are bound by law. The resolve to live their lives with freedom and without freedom from ideological big brother. And the resolve to move this nation forward and live up to our founders' promises. President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris know a thing or two about a thing or two when it comes to our shared values. This won't be a nation of rich versus poor or right-wing versus everyone else. This will be a nation of liberty and justice for all. But it's really going to be up to us. Are you ready to do all you can to make sure that this country survives a great attack from a corrupt demagogue and a right wing that wants to fundamentally change our nation? Yeah. And are we going to fight for our values against theirs? Our values of freedom, fairness, and inclusion over cynicism, hatred, and division? Yeah. And are we going to work hard every day until the election to let our friends and families know who's on their side and who's not? Yeah. You bet. Democrats move us forward, and we are moving straight ahead.
Congressman Mark Pocan, Democrat from Wisconsin, at today's campaign rally in Madison, Wisconsin, with President Joe Biden, who also spoke about the questions being raised about whether he should still be running for the Democratic presidential nomination this year following his debate performance with likely Republican nominee Donald Trump.
Now, you probably heard we had a little debate last week. Can't say it was my best performance.
We love it, Joe.
But ever since then, there's been a lot of speculation. What's Joe going to do? Is he going to stay in the race? Is he going to drop out? What's he going to do? Well, here's my answer. I am running and going to win again. Because we're going to go. the sitting President of the United States of America in no small part because of you. Not a joke. In 2020, you came through for me. I'm the nominee of the Democratic Party. I'm the nominee of this party because millions of Democrats like you just voted for me in primaries all across America. You voted for me to be your nominee, no one else. You, the voters did that. And despite that some folks don't seem to care who you voted for, well, guess what? They're trying to push me out of the race. Well, let me say this as clearly as I can. I'm staying in the race. I'll beat Donald Trump. I will beat him again in 2020. Well, by the way, we're going to do it again in 2024. I learned long ago, when you get knocked down, you get back up. I'm not letting one 90-minute debate wipe out 3.5 years of work. As the governor said, I've led this nation from the depths of pandemic to the strongest economy in the world, and that's literally true. And I and you are not finished yet. Now, you probably also noticed a lot of discussion about my age. I know I look 40. I keep seeing all those stories about I'm being too old. Let me say something. I was too old. I wasn't too old to create over 15 million new jobs. To make sure 21 million Americans are insured under the Affordable Care Act. To beat Big Pharma, the first one ever to do that, and lower the cost of insulin to $35 procedure. Was I too old to relieve student debt for nearly 5 million Americans and grow the economy? Too old to put the first black woman on the Supreme Court of the United States of America? To sign the Respect for Marriage Act? Was I too old to sign the most significant gun safety law in 30 years? To pass the biggest climate bill in the history of the world, not here, the history of the world. But then, my critics say, sure, but he did all that. But that was in the past. What about now? Well, how about the 200,000 jobs we announced yesterday?
President Joe Biden campaigning in Madison, Wisconsin today. WBUR Radio in Boston reports that Representative Seth Moulton of Massachusetts called for President Biden to end his reelection campaign as Mr. Biden and his allies try to prevent a trickle of defections from turning into a flood after his debate performance a week ago. Mr. Moulton on Thursday told the Boston radio station, President Biden has done enormous service to our country, but now it is time for him to follow one of our founding fathers, George Washington's footsteps, and step aside to let new leaders rise up and run against Donald Trump. And the Washington Post reporting today that Senator Mark Warner, Democrat of Virginia, is attempting to assemble a group of Democratic senators to ask President Biden to exit the presidential race, according to two people with direct knowledge of the effort. On the flight from Washington to Wisconsin, White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre held a news conference on Air Force One. One of the first questions was about what she has said previously about President Biden following the debate with Donald Trump.
Can you clear up something from last week? So you had said that the president hadn't been seen by the doctor at all, and then in a call with the governors, the president said that he had had a checkup. So I just wondered, can you explain the discrepancy?
Speak to that. So he did have a short verbal check-in in the recent days about his cold. It wasn't a medical exam or a physical. Just want to be super, super clear about that. It was a conversation, and his doctor didn't think an examination was necessary. I do want to take a little bit of a step back. The way that the president, the president has doctors, a medical unit around him 24/7, and that's not because of this president, that's with all presidents. And the way he certainly experiences his engagement with his doctors is very, very, very different than Americans across the country, right? Americans, they have to get in a car, get public transportation. Some Americans are lucky if they get to see their doctor more than twice a year. And so just want to be very clear about that. His experience, obviously, with dealing with his medical unit, that's right down the colonnade, if you will, from the Oval Office. But he did get do a verbal check-in with his doctor a couple days after.
White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre speaking with reporters on Air Force One. She was also asked about reports that when President Biden met with Democratic governors Wednesday night, he said he needs to get more sleep and work fewer hours, especially holding fewer events after 8 in the evening.
Out of that call was that the president does not want to schedule events after 8 p.m. The president's time is his most valuable asset. Can you tell me a little bit about how he's going to be able to govern and campaign effectively if he is shortening the amount of time that is available for those duties?
And you said something at the top, which is really true. The president's time is one of the most valuable things that we have, right? I'm going to be really mindful and not speak to private conversations, but there's a couple of things I do want to say here. Is that, look, the president works around the clock. It's a 24/7 job, 365 days out of the year, obviously. He also recognizes the importance of striking a balance and taking care of himself, just like we all have to. We are all humans. The president is human as well. He shared that view with governors and took ownership of trying to do too much in the lead up to the debate. That was the conversation. But if you think about, and you'll hear the president talk about this, you've heard me talk about this, you think about the 3.5 years of this presidency and what he's been able to do, and it's been unprecedented and historic, whether it's reaching across the aisle to get really important piece of legislation done on behalf of the American people, the jobs report I just mentioned, in making sure that health care is expanded and includes more people, beating big pharma. If you think about you think about the gun violence and really dealing with an epidemic. There's been many, many things that this president has been able to do, and it is very much in contrast to what Republicans are doing as well. Whether it's Roe, continue to going after Roe, national abortion bans, where the president's trying to fight for a woman's right to choose. I mean, there is a long list of things, successes that this president has had.
Going forward, if there's going to be a change to where he can't do things after 8 o'clock, we're not talking about the last 3 years. We're talking about potentially the next 4 years.
Look, here's what I say, Annie. You have seen the president, even in the past week, you've seen him at 2 o'clock in the morning on the tarmac, greeting voters and Americans, engaging with them right when we landed in North Carolina. You saw him do, and that was 2 o'clock in the morning. You saw him speak in the evening in New York City when he spoke at an event. He has been consistently out there. Some of you may have traveled with us abroad, right? And it wasn't just the G7 or Normandy.
He can't do that anymore.
That's not what he's saying. He said he understands about striking the right balance.
The White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre holding a news conference on Air Force One as they all flew with President Biden from Washington, D.C. to Madison, Wisconsin for today's rally. The White House confirmed this week that Hunter Biden, son of President Joe Biden, has been with his father at the White House during the post-presidential debate time and was in a meeting preparing the speech the president gave Monday night after the Supreme Court's decision on presidential immunity. Congressman Michael Turner, Republican from Ohio, chair of the Intelligence Committee, has written a letter to the White House Chief of Staff Jeff Zients that says, according to news reporting, the president's sudden presence at official meetings has caused confusion for some White House staff, prompting a reaction of what the hell is happening. I write to request a full accounting of any classified information discussed or disclosed in these meetings. Congressman Turner was interviewed on Fox News Channel today.
Clearly, you have a growing number of Democrats who are questioning whether or not Biden can be president for the next 4 years, where many of us on Capitol Hill are worried whether or not he can make the next 4 weeks. With reports coming out now that the president has turned to his son, Hunter Biden, and including him in a very serious national security meetings, the concern rises as to, is Hunter Biden receiving classified briefings? Is he getting access to classified material? Here's a gentleman who obviously has no experience in any national security issue issues, a very questionable background. You got a president of the United States who has a record of recklessly handling classified information, with the special counsel even saying criminally handling classified information, but he wasn't prosecuted because, he's too forgetful. Now you have reports of perhaps his son running things at the White House.
Congressman Michael Turner, Republican from Ohio, chair of the Intelligence Committee, on Fox News Channel this morning. Former President Donald Trump, the presumptive Republican presidential nominee this year, posting on the Truth Social platform, "I have the answer to the crooked Joe Biden incompetence puzzle. Let's do another debate, but this time no holds barred." An all-on discussion with just the two of us on stage, talking about the future of our country. The ratings were massive for the first debate, record-setting, in fact, but this one, because of the format, would blow everything away. And an article from Axios reads that former President Trump on Friday disavowed the Heritage Foundation's Project 2025, which has sparked widespread news coverage about policy plans for a potential second Trump administration. Project 2025 has long annoyed Trump and his top campaign officials, despite the two entities sharing many allies. Lately, Democrats have been attacking Project 2025 as a proxy for the stakes of defeating MAGA Republicans. Trump's disavowal comes 2 days after Heritage Foundation President Kevin Roberts drew outrage from Democrats with his comments about a second American Revolution on Steve Banon's radio show. Donald Trump wrote on the Truth Social platform, "I know nothing about Project 2025. I have no idea who is behind it. I disagree with some of the things they're saying, and some of the things they're saying are absolutely ridiculous and abysmal. Anything they do, I wish them luck, but I have nothing to do with them." That was the reporting from Axios. President Biden in Madison, Wisconsin today for a rally. Milwaukee, Wisconsin will be the site of the Republican National Convention, July 15th through the 18th. And talkradio.gop host Jim Merritt interviewed today the RNC convention chair, Anne Hathaway.
And this is going to be in a Republican year, I think, in Indiana and nationally. Donald Trump has momentum right now. He'll come into the convention with a lot of power. Is the volunteer force? How many people will be in that arena at one time? And there'll be time for media, but are there any secrets? Is there anything for our audience to know, to be watching, and how much will the convention be on television? And it will be streamed live constantly. What's the agenda for the convention from July 15th to July 18th?
So the convention opens on July 15th. There's business of the convention and that we have to do in order to convene the convention and to consecrate the convention, for lack of a better term. There'll be sessions Monday afternoon, Monday night, Tuesday night, Wednesday night, Thursday night. We haven't announced any of the scheduling yet and any of the program yet. That'll be coming in coming weeks, because obviously we'll be using that to generate interest. Yeah. But think about it this way. There's 15,000 media covering this. It is not a one-day live TV show. It is a 4-day live TV show and media opportunity. You're going to see it covered in every format possible. It will look similar and different within the arena as it relates to the coverage. We will have the main media platform, as we always do, that media is on. In addition, there will be media booths throughout the arena where different networks will cover the convention. In addition, though, you'll note this time that we have stand-ups on the floor in order for all of the different media folks who are doing different types of media to have an opportunity to have floor background and to be engaged.
Interview delegates even, right?
Exactly. Interaction with the delegates. All the delegates will be seated on the floor for this convention, which is exciting and something we always strive for. In addition to that, we have the Panther Arena, which will be Media Row. It will be where all kinds of surrogates and elected officials and local activists will be doing interviews from on every type of media you can imagine throughout the week. In addition to that, for the first time ever, we have, and you mentioned this earlier, Wisconsin is a target state. It's a state where we need to do well in order to make sure we capture those electoral votes. And we have Wisconsin Media Row, where we are working exclusively with Wisconsin media to provide surrogates and different interview opportunities for them in order to get to every corner of Wisconsin to try to make sure that we deliver our message. In addition to that, we have the Baird Center, which is the Media Filing Center. And within Skirgon, we also have something we're really excited about that is called Convention Fest, which is going to be local food and beverage, different kinds of merchandise, T-shirts. We've got the Oval Office, just all kinds of Republican things, pins to buy, in order for people to just have a true Republican experience and a true experience down in the secure zone. So you've got media, you've got fun, you've got food, and then you've got the arena where the actual TV show will be.
Anne Hathaway chairs the Committee on Arrangements for the Republican National Convention. A virtual interview today with Talk Radio GOP host Jim Merritt. The convention in Milwaukee starts a week from Monday. Washington Post article today reads that Donald Trump has begun to review draft language for the 2024 Republican platform that anti-abortion leaders expect will abandon the party's decades-long call to amend the U.S. Constitution to extend personhood protections to the unborn, according to multiple people involved with the decisions. The escalating behind-the-scenes disagreement over the abortion language has become so tense and acrimonious in recent weeks that some social conservative leaders have issued public warnings of a coming split within Trump's coalition. Others have started to discuss an effort to issue a minority report to the platform at the convention. According to the people involved, who, like others for the story, spoke on the condition of anonymity to describe private conversations. That was from the Washington Post. President Biden posting on X today about the June jobs report from the Labor Department. Today's report shows that 206,000 new jobs were created last month and a record 15.7 million jobs created during my administration. We have more work to do, but wages are growing faster than prices, and we're seeing the highest share of working-age Americans in the workforce in over 20 years. The acting Labor Secretary Julie Su was interviewed about the jobs report by Yahoo Finance TV.
Another solid jobs report. 206,000 jobs created last month, bringing the total since President Biden's come into office to nearly 16 million. The unemployment rate remains at historic lows. It ticked up slightly to 4.1%, but remember, before this, it was at or below 4% for the longest stretch since Neil Armstrong stepped foot on the moon. We are looking at not just temporary improvements to our economy, but a national strategy that President Biden brings that has resulted in the most robust recovery from 2020 that could have been imagined. If you recall, on this day in 2020, under the last administration, the unemployment rate was nearly 12%. And there was no national strategy to address the economy or the global pandemic. President Biden came in with a national strategy. We've been implementing it. And of course, there's more work to do, right? We are not going to reverse decades of underinvestment in our nation's workers, in our nation's industries, in growing jobs overnight, but we're on the right track. We're making progress, and we'll keep at it.
The acting Labor Secretary Julie Su today on Yahoo Finance TV. An article at Fox Business, the June jobs report revealed higher than expected job growth with 206,000 new jobs created. However, a third of those jobs were in the government sector. Government employment rose by 70,000, which is far higher than the average of 49,000 over the last year. Employment in the sector was boosted by local government, excluding education and state government. The health sector added 49,000 positions, lifted by increased hiring in ambulatory health care services and at hospitals. That was from Fox Business. Wall Street today, the Dow up 67, NASDAQ up 164, S&P up 30. From USA Today, as Hurricane Beryl moves inland over the Yucatan Peninsula, those in its path can expect strong winds, storm surges, and damaging waves, the National Hurricane Center announced Friday morning. The center said the hurricane should cross the northern Yucatan Peninsula Friday and then emerge over the southwestern Gulf of Mexico later Friday night. By the end of the weekend, the hurricane should move towards northeastern Mexico and southern Texas. That was from USA Today. Texas Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, who is now acting governor while Governor Greg Abbott is out of the country on a pre-planned trade mission, gave an update today at the Texas Department of Emergency Management in Austin.
It appears that this storm either is a tropical storm with heavy rain that could be 12 to 15 inches in some areas. We don't know exactly sure yet where that may be, whether it's heavy rain and flooding or if it's a hurricane category 1, 2, or worse. It would be here likely on Monday, and we'd start seeing the impact of that starting on Sunday. Again, we're preparing for the worst, praying and hoping for the least amount of rain and a lesser storm. But you want to be in position of wherever you're going to be by Monday. Remember, seldom does wind cause death in a hurricane. It's flooding. That's the most dangerous position for someone trying to drive in flooded waters on flooded roads. I've just finished a briefing, a very deep briefing with our Emergency Management Council of the state, all over the state. And our local mayors and judges have been in touch with the chief for the last couple of days, and they are preparing. So once again, we hope and we pray for nothing more than a rain event, although that will still be heavy rain in some areas, flooding in some areas, pretty much for sure. But we're going to have to be patient, not preparing, and you should not be patient preparing, but we're going to have to see this storm move off of the peninsula, off the land, and into the Gulf of Mexico. And once that does, in the next 15 to 20 hours or so, it's a very slow-moving storm, about 6 miles per hour, very slow-moving storm. Once it moves into the water, the storm will tell us more of where it's heading. And we'll know to be able to pinpoint it much more than we can today. But right now, if you're along the coast from Brownsville to the Louisiana border, pay attention to this storm because you have about 2 days, the rest of today and tomorrow and some of Sunday, to prepare when it hits on Monday.
Texas Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, a Republican in Austin. He is the acting governor while Governor Greg Abbott is out of the country. It was a pre-planned trade mission to Asia. Washington Today continues in a moment.
C-SPAN's evening newsletter, Word for Word, brings you a recap of the day's most important events. Find out what happened on Capitol Hill, the White House, and with policymakers, all delivered straight to your inbox. Subscribe now at cspan.org/connect.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app and wherever you find your podcasts. Britain's Labour Party, writes CBS News, swept power Friday after more than a decade in opposition, as a jaded electorate handed the party a landslide victory, but also a mammoth task of reinvigorating a stagnant economy and dispirited nation. Labour Party leader Keir Starmer officially became Prime Minister late Friday, leading his party back to government less than 5 years after it suffered its worst defeat in almost a century. In the merciless choreography of British politics, he took charge in 10 Downing Street hours after Thursday's votes were counted, as Conservative leader Rishi Sunak hustled out. With all but 2 of the individual election results in, Labour had won 412 seats in the 650-seat House of Commons, and the Conservatives 121. That was from CBS News. The outgoing Prime Minister Rishi Sunak spoke outside the Prime Minister's residence, 10 Downing Street in London.
I will shortly be seeing His Majesty the King to offer my resignation as Prime Minister. To the country, I would like to say first and foremost, I am sorry. I have given this job my all, but you have sent a clear signal that the government of the United Kingdom must change, and yours is the only judgment that matters. I have heard your anger, your disappointment, and I take responsibility for this loss. To all the Conservative candidates and campaigners who worked tirelessly but without success, I am sorry that we could not deliver what your efforts deserved. It pains me to think how many good colleagues who contributed so much to their communities and our country will now no longer sit in the House of Commons. I thank them for their hard work and their service. Following this result, I will step down as party leader, not immediately, but once the formal arrangements for selecting my successor are in place. It is important that after 14 years in government, the Conservative Party rebuilds, but also that it takes up its crucial role in opposition professionally and effectively. When I first stood here as your Prime Minister, I told you the most important task I had was to return stability to our economy. Inflation is back to target, mortgage rates are falling, and growth has returned. We have enhanced our standing in the world, rebuilding relations with allies, leading global efforts to support Ukraine, and becoming the home of a new generation of transformative technologies. And our United Kingdom is stronger too, with the Windsor Framework, devolution restored in Northern Ireland, and our union strengthened. I'm proud of those achievements. I believe this country is safer, stronger, and more secure than it was 20 months ago. And it is more prosperous, fairer, and resilient than it was in 2010. Whilst he has been my political opponent, Sir Keir Starmer will shortly become our Prime Minister. In this job, his successes will be all our successors, and I wish him and his family well. Whatever our disagreements in this campaign, he is a decent, public-spirited man who I respect. He and his family deserve the very best of our understanding as they make the huge transition to their new lives behind this door, and as he grapples with this most demanding of jobs in an increasingly unstable world.
The outgoing Prime Minister of Great Britain, Rishi Sunak, leader for now of the Conservative Party, speaking outside the Prime Minister's residence, 10 Downing Street in London. Short time later, the incoming Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, of the Labour Party, made a speech in the same place, which is now his new home.
I have just returned from Buckingham Palace, where I accepted an invitation from His Majesty the King to form the next government of this great nation. I want to thank the outgoing Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak. His achievement as the first British Asian Prime Minister of our country, the extra effort that will have required, should not be underestimated by anyone. And we pay tribute to that today. And we also recognise the dedication and hard work he brought to his leadership. But now our country has voted decisively for change, for national renewal, and a return of politics to public service.
The new British Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, outside the Prime Minister's residence in London. Also in his speech, he talked about the specifics of the economic agenda that he plans to implement.
Changing a country is not like flicking a switch. The world is now a more volatile place. This will take a while. But have no doubt that the work of change begins immediately. Have no doubt that we will rebuild Britain with wealth created in every community, our NHS back on its feet facing the future, secure borders, safer streets, everyone treated with dignity and respect at work, the opportunity of clean British power cutting your energy bills for good. And brick by brick, we will rebuild the infrastructure of opportunity, the world-class schools and colleges, the affordable homes that I know are the ingredients of hope for working people, the security that working-class families like mine can build their lives around. Because if I asked you now whether you believe that Britain will be better for your children, I know too many of you would say no. And so my government will fight every day until you believe again. From now on, you have a government unburdened by doctrine, guided only by the determination to serve your interest, to defy, quietly, those who have written our country off. You have given us a clear mandate and we will use it to deliver change, to restore service and respect to politics, end the era of noisy performance, tread more lightly on your lives, and unite our country.
The new Prime Minister of Great Britain, Keir Starmer, head of the Labour Party, outside 10 Downing Street in London. C-SPAN spoke this morning with C-SPAN's Westminster producer Peter Knowles about the results of the British election.
The Conservatives lost this election. They lost it hugely. I mean, they lost a huge share of their vote, and Labour were able to take advantage of that by winning seat after seat, and the other party, Liberal Democrats, the same, and they just took hundreds of seats off the Conservatives. How they did it was by persuading the public that they needed a change, that 14 years of Conservative rule hadn't gone well, and that it was time for a change. And it points to the problem, the difficulty that all governments have at the moment if they are incumbent in staying in power. They know what to do, but not how to get re-elected to do it. And that's what happened. And the remarkable thing about the voting pattern is that in England, Labour's vote share didn't increase, and yet they got a landslide. And that's because the Conservative vote got shared around, and particularly with an insurgent party, the Reform Party, new on the scene, and it was devastating. It meant that the Conservatives were easy picking for Labour and the Liberal Democrats to take a lot of seats off them.
Mr. Knowles, because you follow British politics so well, explain to our audience the difference between being a Conservative and being a Labour when it comes to key differences.
Well, the parties are centrist, I would say. Centre-left is the Labour Party, and the Conservatives centre-right. Some would argue with those descriptions, but I think it's fair. And there isn't a vast ideological divide between them at the moment. There was 5 years ago when Boris Johnson won the election. This time the emphasis was different in terms of the Conservatives saying that they would lower taxes and lower migration to the country, but with a difficult record to defend because migration has gone up enormously, and taxes have gone up because of the COVID period and because of the Ukraine war. So you'd be surprised, I think, though, how relatively small and few the ideological differences are between those two main parties, and yet it's led to a landslide victory for Labour.
A new Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, tell us about not only the policy positions he holds for, but his style of governing.
Well, we're going to find out in less than 2 weeks' time when there's the King's speech, which will give the programme for government. But what he said about his style is he's talked about service and quietening down the style of government and avoiding the perception of chaos that there has been with so many Conservative prime ministers. We've got through 5 of them in recent years, a huge turnover of ministers. And so stability and modesty of targets and a kind of managerial approach seems to be what he's offering and what the public want.
When it comes to the former Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, talk about what led to his downfall.
Many commentators think that he never had a chance, that after the chaos of the Boris Johnson administration, which ended horribly, really, when it was discovered that when the rest of the country was in COVID lockdown, it was party time in Downing Street. Then we had an unbelievably short-lived and very chaotic administration from Liz Truss. So Rishi Sunak had a very difficult inheritance, and he can claim some successes in his nearly 2 years. But it was going to be a very tall order if he was going to win the election. However, he has not just not won it, he's lost it really badly, and he's blamed for calling it early. He didn't need to call it this early, and for some pretty bad missteps in the campaign, perhaps the most notable of which was leaving the D-Day commemoration events early to go off and do a TV interview, and that didn't go down well.
C-SPAN's Westminster producer Peter Knowles joining us from London on this morning's Washington Journal program on C-SPAN. The Independent newspaper in Great Britain reports that Labour has emerged from the general election with one of the biggest parliamentary majorities in history, having won 412 seats. That's a majority of 176, with results from the last two seats still to come. The Conservatives have won just 121 seats. The Liberal Democrats won 71 seats, and the Green Party picked up 4 seats, and the Scottish National Party 9, and Plaid Cymru 4. That's a party in Wales. Reform UK's seat tally rose from 4 to 5 after a recount. That's the reporting from The Independent. The White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre said in her Air Force One news conference today that President Joe Biden has spoken with the new British Prime Minister to congratulate him.
Earlier today, President Biden called Prime Minister Starmer of the United Kingdom to congratulate him on his appointment as Prime Minister following yesterday's election. This is a special relationship between our countries, and the President conveyed that he looks forward to working closely with the Prime Minister on the full range of critical issues that the United States and the United Kingdom are engaged on. The President told the Prime Minister that he is committed to deepening U.S.-UK cooperation in many areas of our shared interests. President Biden looks forward to welcoming the Prime Minister to Washington, D.C. next week during the NATO summit. We will have a readout of that call to you to all of you very, very soon.
The White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre, part of our news conference on Air Force One. A story from Reuters reads, on a night of sweeping change across British politics, one thing at the heart of the government remained the same on Friday morning: Larry the Downing Street cat. The white and tabby cat, who bears the official title Chief Mouser of the Cabinet Office, was seen padding around the famous high-gloss black door to number 10, the office he will now share with his 6th Prime Minister. Larry has been a resident in the seat of British power since 2011, when then Prime Minister David Cameron, under then Prime Minister David Cameron, he was adopted from a nearby Battersea Dogs and Cats home. While Larry is clearly going nowhere, he might soon have some company. Starmer already has a cat named Jojo, who's expected to join him when he takes up residence in the street. That was from Reuters. Karine Jean-Pierre mentioned that next week is the NATO Leaders Summit in Washington, D.C. Another Reuters article from Brussels, where NATO is headquartered, reads that NATO was informed of Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban's trip to Moscow for talks with Russian President Vladimir Putin in advance. NATO chief Jens Stoltenberg said on Friday Orban is traveling in his capacity as Hungary's prime minister and will not represent NATO, of which Hungary is a member, Stoltenberg said. Speaking at a news conference, Stoltenberg said Russia so far has not significantly changed its stance on the war in Ukraine, and there were no signs Putin was ready to negotiate for peace. That was from Reuters. Here's the question to the NATO Secretary General.
Secretary General, what does Prime Minister Viktor Orban's visit to Moscow say about the state of unity within NATO on the eve of the Washington summit? And do you agree with European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen's assessment that it represents appeasement?
Prime Minister Viktor Orban has been in Moscow before. Then he has informed us about his visits. He has also we also discussed his visits after he has returned. Hungary informed us about this upcoming visit, and I expect that when Viktor Orban is in Washington at the NATO summit next week, there will be opportunities to discuss and address the discussions he had in Moscow. This is something which takes place on a regular basis between allies. I visited Hungary just a couple of weeks ago. I met with Prime Minister Viktor Orban. We, of course, discussed the war in Ukraine, Russia's war of aggression. And all allies, also Hungary, agrees that Russia is responsible for the war. Russia is the perpetrator, and Russia can end this war today by stop attacking Ukraine. of course, Viktor Orban is not representing NATO at these meetings. He is representing his own country, and Prime Minister Orban. Also, when I met him a couple of weeks ago, we also discussed his upcoming visit to Kiev. So you may know that he also visited Kiev recently. What is important is that all allies, also Hungary, agrees that Russia is the aggressor and Russia is responsible for the war, and that Ukraine's territorial integrity and sovereignty must be respected. I would also like to say that during my visit to Budapest a couple of weeks ago, we of course discussed the war of aggression against Ukraine, but we also discussed NATO support, and we were able to find a way, an agreement that enables NATO allies to step up their support, to do more, to institutionalize and strengthen our support to Ukraine without Hungary blocking that. So we will of course continue to consult among NATO allies, and I welcome the fact that we have found a way to avoid any blockages from Budapest to more support from NATO to Ukraine.
The NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg at a news conference at NATO headquarters in Brussels. He also said there, our most urgent task at next week's NATO summit in Washington is support for Ukraine. A New York Times article about the Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban meeting Russian President Vladimir Putin in Moscow reads, a spokesman for Mr. Orban, Zoltán Kovács, said the Hungarian leader was in Moscow as part of his peace mission. Mr. Orban has made vague calls for a ceasefire and direct negotiations between Moscow and Kyiv, a stance that leaders in both countries have rejected. He has publicly put forward no concrete plan for a settlement. Reporting from the New York Times. And thanks for listening to Washington Today. Subscribe to C-SPAN's free evening newsletter, word for word, and have the stories making headlines in Washington emailed to you every day. Sign up at cspan.org/connect. Have a good night and weekend.